Hello everyone, this is meteorologist Brett Rathbun with the National Weather Service at Albany, and I will be covering part 5 of our Spring SKYWARN Spotter Training session. This part will be focusing on heat, excessive rainfall, and flooding. We will begin with heat, and we will start with going through the criteria for when we issue heat advisories and excessive heat warnings. For New York and Vermont, the heat advisory criteria is a heat index value of greater than or equal to 95 degrees for 2 hours or more on a given day. For Massachusetts and Connecticut, the criteria is for heat index values 95 to 99 for 2 consecutive days, or 100 to 104 for any duration on any given day. For all 4 states, the excessive heat warning criteria is the same, that is greater than or equal to 105 degrees. In order to compute the heat index value, we use the table on the left, which shows different temperature values and relative humidity values, and that computes the heat index value. So let's say, for example, the air temperature is 94 degrees Fahrenheit with a relative humidity of 55%. If you see the number where those two values meet, you will see the number 106 would be the heat index value for those two values. And that would be with an excessive heat warning criteria. These are a couple of infographics showing some of the dangers with heat. So on the right, you can see the difference between heat exhaustion and heat stroke. So it's definitely good to keep those in mind. And if you see anybody with these type of symptoms, be sure to try to use some of the safety precautions seen on the bottom. So definitely, if anybody is potentially suffering from heat stroke, 911 is definitely the first plan of action when you see that. We like to, unfortunately, we do have, some fatalities of children and in a hot vehicle. So we always like to show this infographic on the left to never forget anyone in a hot vehicle. So on the bottom left part, you see a few different messages. Those can be some of the safety precautions that you could do to remind yourself or others of potentially having a child in the vehicle, just to make sure that you don't leave them inside. We will next move on to flooding, and this bar chart here will show the number of U.S. flood fatalities each year for the past 11 years. You can see there are quite a few values. Looks like the average is somewhere probably between around 80 and 100 per year. And the majority of the flood fatalities do occur from people driving through flooded roadways. So that is something we always try to keep messaging, that whenever there is a flooded roadway, do not drive through the flooded roadway, even if you're a local or even if you can see the road. It is very dangerous. Here we'll show the difference between a flood versus a flash flood. So a flood, or sometimes we do use the term aerial flood, but that is less common nowadays. But this is any high flow, overflow, or inundation of water which can cause or threaten damage. And these typically occur slower and more gradually. This could also just be ponding of water over roadways, parking lots, different types of grassy surfaces, low-lying areas, poor drainage areas. That is the type of flooding that you would typically see in this type of regime. And usually if we have water in this type of nature, it usually is either standing water or is moving relatively slowly, but it is still dangerous. Flash flood is a little bit different. It is a more rapid and extreme flow of high water into a normally dry area, or a rapid rise in a stream or a creek. And this requires immediate action to protect life and property. Flash floods occur most often during the summertime when we have slow-moving thunderstorms producing very heavy rainfall over a short period of time, which can cause many storm drains or whatnot to not be able to handle the amount of water to drain through. So it just causes the water to continue to pile higher and higher on nearby surfaces. Other terms of flooding that we use on the left is what we call street or urban and poor drainage flooding. Again, this is just a overflow of water onto a roadway, which usually doesn't move very rapidly, but usually dissipates very shortly after the heavy rain ends and storm drains are able to handle the water once again. River flooding occurs when rivers overflow their banks and the water flows downstream of the river, and usually will continue until after the river crests, and then eventually this water will begin to slowly recede afterwards. Again, the message in the middle that we always like to let people know is when flooded, turn around, don't drown. The Weather Prediction Center issues an excessive rainfall outlook just to highlight when there is the potential for flash flooding. So on the left side, you can see an example of one outlook. This was from September 1st of 2021. So this is actually associated with the leftover circulation of Ida as it moved across the mid-Atlantic and into parts of the Northeast, where we had a high risk for southern portions of our area. And on the right side, you can see the difference in the excessive rainfall risk categories going from marginal, slight, moderate to high, indicating the increased potential for more widespread and dangerous flash floods. Some additional flood safety we'd like to say, again, with regards to most of the flood fatalities occurring in vehicles, don't underestimate the power of water. So 6 inches of fast-moving water can knock over and carry away an adult. 12 inches of fast-moving water can move away a small car, and even 18 to 24 inches of fast-moving water can carry away most large SUVs, vans, and trucks. So even if you have a larger vehicle flowing through very rapid water, it can still sweep your car away. So again, never drive your vehicle into water of an unknown depth. Flooding at night is especially dangerous because you cannot see the road, and in some cases you can't actually see the flooded roadways in front of you. So again, some other flood safety, move to higher ground if flooding threatens your area. If you live or work in a flood-prone area, definitely remain alert at any time during periods of heavy rain and know what your safety measure is if something like that were to occur. And again, it's very hard to recognize dangers of flooding at night just because of how difficult it is to see. We will get into one recent flood event. This occurred October 31st to November 1st of 2019. This one generally impacted portions of the western Mohawk Valley into parts of the southern Adirondacks. In this region, rainfall totals reached anywhere from around 3 to 6 inches of rain. And you can see here on the right, this is some images of some flooded roadways and also some roads that completely washed out due to this heavy rainfall. We did have one fatality that occurred from this event in Newport and Herkimer County. And this was due to somebody being swept away in floodwaters. This event had plenty of flooded and flash flood reports. And you can see here on the right that many of the area rivers reached moderate, if not major flood, and we did have a couple record flood stages from this event. Those record river floods were the Sacandaga River at Hope and the Mohawk River at Little Falls. You can see these two images are hydrographs just showing the height of the river height, stage height at various times of this event, and you can see how quickly both of these gauges and both of the water rose on these rivers during this heavy rain event. And you can see that both the Sacandaga and the Mohawk River had record crests that occurred either October 31st, and then we also had the Mohawk River having a second crest late November 1st into early on November 2nd. We will play this video quickly. This just goes through some of the flash flooding that occurred from this event in the village of Dolgeville in southern Herkimer County.
Now we'll take you to the worst hit, or one of the worst hit areas in our region. You can see behind me the rushing water. That is the village of Dolgeville, under a state of emergency this afternoon. Still, many areas underwater this morning, still underwater at this point. Take a look at this. This is a swift water rescue that brought the governor to the village early this morning, where he says he witnessed that swift water rescue. We'll have more on that coming up in just a moment. This is what our camera crews captured as the sun came up. You can see the water running across the roadway. We spoke with the mayor early this morning, and then we spoke with her a little bit later on in the morning. The mayor says the flooding started around 1 o'clock in the morning, a devastating scene. The creek had gone over its banks on North Main Street again around 1 o'clock this morning, and this is what followed.
The water was up under the bridge. Vehicles had gone down the stream at that point. At this point, we've had about 6 vehicles that have been counted going down the stream. People were all evacuated. One family recently got out, but everyone's safe and sound.
The state of emergency in the village of Dolgeville continues until further notice. We also spoke early this morning with the governor on the phone. He was in Dolgeville during those early morning hours. Here's what he had to say.
It was frightening. You know, we've had a number of storms across the state. I've seen a lot of things, but this was really frightening. And we could have had a loss of life if we didn't have the great first responders on site and trained and ready. The East Canada Creek just exploded. We had about 4 or 5 inches of rain. The creek came over the banks, went through the residential neighborhood, and the streets literally had about 10 feet of water, and it was moving very fast. People were swept in their homes. There was a danger the whole house itself could be taken away. Vehicles were being washed down the streets. And there was a family that had to be evacuated by what we call swift water rescue operations.
And that was a phone interview earlier this morning with the governor. This is a look at that swift water rescue evacuation the governor was referring to. Again, the mayor of Dolgeville, police, several emergency evacuation crews were on scene for the better part of the morning. Again, this all starting about 1 o'clock in the morning. The state of emergency called about 4 o'clock this morning, trying to get people out of their homes and to safer ground. The governor was on the scene for that rescue, and his office shared that video with us.
Alrighty, we will move over to another flash flood event that happened in 2020. This is in Whitehall, New York. On the left, you can see the radar image where we actually had just kind of training thunderstorms moving over the same area for several hours, producing some very heavy rainfall, and that prompted a flash flood in this region. So that is a 4-hour radar loop. On the right side is just an image of radar estimated rainfall, and some estimates within that 4-hour period were as high as over 6.5 inches. Within this event, we had 10 wind damage and 5 flash flood reports. And we also had one of our co-op observers measured 5.85 inches of rainfall from this event. Here are just a few pictures of the flood damage that occurred from this. On the left side is just Route 22. You can see the Route 22 is completely flooded with cars submerged. And we also had some damage at the Whitehall Central School, where we can see some flooding in the parking lot. And then some of that water also did seep into the school, causing some damage to other different rooms. Lastly, we will just briefly touch on flood inundation mapping. So this is going to be the future of river flood forecasting for the National Weather Service. So really what this will mean is that on the images on the left just kind of show an example. This is in Washington County, the Hudson River at Fort Edward. So right now on the bottom left side is what we use to issue river flood warnings at this time, which are hydrographs, just showing the stage of the river and what the forecast is going to. And then on the right side, you see just a general description of what flooding you're expecting at that time. So at 27 feet, you have water over the concrete wall at the Fort Edward Yacht Basin. Several homes nearby have water approaching them. That is definitely good information, but it is still very vague. It doesn't really give too much of an information of which several homes nearby could be impacted. And this is what the future of flood inundation mapping will be on the top right. It'll actually be a much more high resolution image showing that at that certain stage of 27 feet, what will actually be inundated. So everything you see here colored in red or shaded in red would potentially be impacted if we had a river level of that height at that gauge. So you can see anything in red would be impacted. So you can see actually some places inside, or you can see the big building just off to the north of where that red shading is. That wouldn't be impacted. So that can really help hone in a little bit more on where the more significant flooding impacts will be. And that will improve evacuation orders, and so on and so forth as you go through these various flooding events. This is still very new. This will continue to be updated as we continue to move forward. And sooner or later, all National Weather Service offices will be using flood inundation mapping more for their flash flood and river flood forecasting. This is all I have for part 5. So thank you all for listening, and feel free to move on to part 6 or any other lesson in this Spring SKYWARN series. Thank you.